The UFC's return to Fight Island comes to a close with the year's most anticipated event, UFC 254, Khabib vs Gaethje. Having blazed his way to the top of the lightweight division and captured the interim lightweight championship against Tony Ferguson, Justin the Highlight Gaethje has one last obstacle in his path before he can be called the greatest lightweight in the world.
Khabib is the best in the world, and there's no other challenge I want right now.
But with his legacy intact, long-reigning champion Khabib Nurmagomedov has seen challengers come and go.
There's the tap! Still undisputed!
At UFC 254, the Eagle will be looking to put a stop to Gaethje's momentum and continue on his road towards championship immortality. It's Khabib versus Gaethje for UFC Lightweight Gold.
Hello and welcome to UFC Inside the Octagon. John Good alongside Dan Hardy, of course, and boy, have we got a big one for you. UFC 254, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje. The challenger Gaethje is looking to take that perfect record from the champion and, of course, leave Fight Island with the belt. Khabib, Dan, it's a legacy fight for him, wants to extend that streak. What a fight this is.
It really is. And obviously, we know what Khabib's capable of. We've seen what he can do to every contender that stepped in there before. The difference is, Justin Gaethje, stylistically, I think is a very interesting matchup. Gaethje's got the wrestling credentials coming into mixed martial arts from his high school and collegiate days. The difference is he uses his wrestling in a purely defensive manner. A lot like Chuck Liddell, force people to stand up and deal with his knockout power. And that's really what he's trying to do here. He's trying to force Khabib into a gunfight because I would say that Justin Gaethje's got the higher caliber gun.
Interesting, and I like that line. Right, well, let's go to the facts and stats, and shall we put them side by side and look at some of the stats that they've achieved since they've been with the UFC, and not a lot of difference physically, Dan. There's exactly the same reach, just a little bit of height there for Gaethje. But moving on to the stats for Khabib, of course, long win streak. Guy's never been beaten. I like this. Third, highest strike differential in UFC lightweight history. What that means is he can dish out the punishment without retaliation. But the interesting fact about this is where he gets his work done. When we normally look at strike differential, it's between a couple of different guys that are in the stand-up, and it means that they've got really good head movement. But Khabib is beating you up on the ground, so it's very unlikely he's going to take any punishment anyway.
Well, this is it. Around 55-56% of his strikes are landed on the ground, which means that he's able to, as you said, dish out the punishment and not take any in return. And that's why, he's undefeated. He's got to this stage of his career without really being hurt or challenged or taking any big sizable shots from anybody. We've not seen him damaged or cut. This is what Justin Gaethje is up against. He's going to be put in positions where he can't strike back. He has to defend himself first and try and get back to his feet. And with that high striking differential on the floor, it just shows that he's able to completely dominate people and rain down strikes from all different kinds of angles and force people into really bad positions.
Moving over to Justin Gaethje, Dan, and look at the stats that he's been able to compile. That strike rate is absolutely sickening. What an effort that is. Highest strike rate in UFC history. And let's go down to the shortest time in bottom position in lightweight history. Third on that leaderboard, just 17 seconds on his butt. But as he said in his interview, since he was 5 years of age, Dan, he's been training not to be put on his back.
Well, he's built a career out of forcing people to stand and trade with him because he knows he comes off really well in that exchange. And the high strike rate really speaks to his conditioning as well as his output. He's able to force people into, really, really rough circumstances, as we've seen from his most recent fight against Tony Ferguson. He backs people up, he hits them with volume, he hits them with variety, and he either wears them down or switches their lights off. The interesting thing here is that, we've not seen anybody really be able to force Khabib into a striking match for any long period of time. So if Gaethje's takedown defense is able to hold up in this one, that's what he has to offer the champion.
All right, well, let's get into the meat of it, Dan, and the analysis. And let's start with the champion then. And, well, it all stems from his wrestling, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the only place we can start really when we talk about Khabib. He wouldn't be the champion that he is without that amazing grappling skill that he's got. And the thing is, his takedown success is, I think it's around 47%, but that speaks to the persistence of his game as well. He's not really interested in whether he lands that first or second or third takedown. He keeps chasing it because that's a part of the process of wearing you down. I mean, you can either accept the takedown and then get worn down with strikes on the floor, or you can defend it until your gas tank is sapped and then he'll take you down anyway. This whole analysis rides on that fact. Like, A, can Justin Gaethje stay on his feet? And B, if he can't stay on his feet, how many times can he get back to his feet before he's absolutely exhausted? And we've seen what happens when people get exhausted against Khabib. But it's the persistence that wears people down. It's the constant pressure. Whether he's fighting a good wrestler or a good striker, he has the same thing. He brings the Khabib game and he forces you to deal with it. And I just don't know how anybody prepares for that. It's very difficult to replicate that in the gym, to bring someone in that can put you under that kind of pressure. And then, even if you can find a wrestler that can force you to work like that, they're not ground and pounding you like Khabib. So it's a two-prong attack.
Yeah, well, we've got to have a look at the response to that then, Dan. You've been talking about Gaethje and how he doesn't use his wrestling offensively necessarily, but for sure he's been having to call upon his defensive wrestling in his time with the UFC.
He has, absolutely. And what's interesting about these stats, when we talk about Gaethje's takedown defense and his wrestling ability, as we say, he's not interested in taking people down. He knows where he plays his game, and he knows that he needs good wrestling defense to back that up. Gaethje's takedown defense is 80%. I mean, that's not many times people have attempted to shoot on him. He's been taken down twice, but in the times that he's been taken down, he's only spent 17 seconds total on the floor, which is why he's so high up in that leaderboard. And this is really the thing we have to focus on, because yes, he's been taken down a couple of times, but the problem is holding him down. As soon as someone starts to open up and try and progress their position or to work some strikes, Gaethje's back to his feet, and then they're back to dealing with his pressure and his power. I mean, this is really where Gaethje's got to go right back to his high school and collegiate wrestling days and draw on that kind of experience. He knows he needs to stay off the fence because that's really where Khabib does most of his work. Shooting on Gaethje out in the centre is going to be very difficult to take him down. He's got great front headlock wrestling. He's got a good sprawl, and he can hustle and punish you in those positions as well. Whereas if he's backed up against the fence, which is where we see a lot of the good ground and pound fighters work, they can force you up against the fence and collapse your hips into it, which makes your legs vulnerable. And then he's defending takedowns and he's on the floor and he's scrambling back to his feet, and he's caught in that cycle that we see Khabib do so well.
They're very open that if he ends up on his back, it's going to be difficult to get back to his feet. But Dan, Gaethje has said that he has been wrestling since he was, knee high pretty much. And he is the same age as Khabib is, and he doesn't believe he's put any more work in those areas. So we'll obviously see how that gets tested and how that response holds up. But when we think about Justin Gaethje, you think about pure violence. And he's a one-of-a-kind sort of power hitter in that division. And for sure, that is something that Khabib's got to be looking out for.
Absolutely, because even if Khabib's able to take him down every round and control him, every round starts on the feet. That's 5 opportunities for Gaethje to land a shot before he ends up on the floor and gets caught up in that cycle. And we know from Gaethje's more recent fights that he really only needs one strike to put people's lights out. And this is a point of difference between Gaethje when he first signed with the UFC, when he had that old school hard-headed mentality, and the difference with Gaethje after his 2 losses. He had a conversation with Trevor Whitman. He wants to be a champion. He knows that he needs to make better decisions going into fights, and what we've seen from even when the first round knockouts that we've seen against Barbosa and Vic, it was octagon control and footwork. It was controlling people up against the fence, forcing them to peel out one way or the other, and unfortunately for both of those guys, they went onto the right hand of Gaethje, which is a one-shot knockout. It's an obvious game plan for Gaethje. He doesn't want to get tangled up with Khabib. He wants to be patient and pick his shots. And, he only needs one shot over 25 minutes to really do some damage. And, the thing is, we've not seen Khabib hurt. We've seen a couple of times where we may have seen him rocked a little bit. People talk about the Michael Johnson fight. People talk about, when he got clipped by Poirier as well. But honestly, even if he was hurt, he responded so well. So Gaethje's got to try not to get over enthusiastic as well and chase him down if he does feel like he's hurt, because then that opens the takedown up again for Khabib.
To coin a phrase that you were saying, there are 5 times when this fight will be obviously stood up, and that is the beginning of every round. So Khabib has to come to the fight with that knowledge, and he has built a striking game around his wrestling. It really does complement it very well.
It does, absolutely. And we've seen good developments in it. You know, when he first came into the UFC, the majority of the strikes that he landed were on the floor, and he would use the occasional strike to set up his takedowns. But as he's developed into his game, he's developed more confidence. You know, as we've seen people stuff his takedowns, we've seen him lean slightly more on his striking. You know, we saw him work a great jab against Conor McGregor when his takedowns were stopped in the 3rd round, and you know the same with Iaquinta. You know, kept stinging him with the jab, and it's a nice clean, you know, stinging weapon that he uses that backs people up. And we know he's got power as well. It's a little bit more unorthodox, but it catches people by surprise a lot of the time. And he uses a dip. He lowers his level onto his lead leg, which feints the takedown, which forces people to make a decision. You know, when we saw Conor McGregor fight him, the decision was forced on Conor McGregor to, you know, do you lower your hands or do you cover your head? And obviously, you know, he's been under a wrestling offensive for 2 rounds at that point, so his choice was to lower his hands, and he got caught with that beautiful overhand. And that's the benefit in Khabib constantly feinting the takedown, is that the shot can come over the top. But the other punch that we've seen him use as well, particularly in his earlier fights in the UFC, Thiago Tavares is the one that sticks out in my mind, as well as Kamal Shalarus, is that unusual sweeping kind of I've been calling it an eagle punch, but it's very unique to him. I mean, we see other people using similar punches. I've heard people talk about the gazelle punch that Tyson used, that Aldana used against Caitlin Vera. But the difference with this one is it raises up underneath the chin. He's still hitting with these front 2 knuckles, but he's hitting underneath the chin with the top of his glove. And the reason that's useful in this fight is because the times we've seen Gaethje exposed in the striking range, it's been up that centre channel. Gaethje covers square here. So anything coming over the top, like the overhand, I would imagine Gaethje's going to be ready to catch that. It's that centre channel. And if you go back and you watch the Thiago Tavares fight, as Khabib dips to level change, Tavares covers with a lead hand, but also brings his other hand up to cover the left hook. And it still sneaks up inside his jab and practically knocks him unconscious. It's a very unique punch. It's very valuable against Justin Gaethje, and it complements perfectly with his takedown offensive.
Wonderful stuff. Dan, take a breath for a moment. There's plenty more analysis coming up. We are now going to take a break. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to UFC Inside the Octagon, where we are breaking down the big lightweight title fight between Khabib and Gaethje on UFC Fight Island. So what we've learned so far, of course, Khabib's wrestling. He comes with that big pressure and he absolutely bullies everyone. On the other side, Justin Gaethje, who's been a wrestler all of his life, definitely is something that is going to be called upon defensively, and we've seen him do that in his time so far. But he offers that big knockout power, which Khabib's going to be very aware of. The fight always starts standing, and we've also seen that Khabib has an evolving striking game which very much complements the way that he wrestles. So, Dan, with that in mind, we need to go to the next stage. Let's pull up the champ as well. And he's just a mauling bully at times. It's a horrible position to be in if ever you're facing Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Well, this is it. I mean, you know, the reality is, you know, we could have probably wrapped this analysis up in 5 minutes if we were talking about what's, you know, most likely to happen in a Khabib fight, because he does just maul people. You know, he gets inside their range, he drags them down against the fence. You know, depending on whether it takes multiple times or the first shot works, they always end up there. And then they're on this grappling offensive that's complemented with this high volume ground and pound. 55% of his strikes landed on the ground. He rains down those strikes from all different angles and just, you know, slowly breaks people down. There's no real rush for him to get the finish. It's so dominant that he's really under no onus really to get them out of there any sooner. He just drains people. He wears people down. He breaks them. He steals their soul, and then he starts taking their back. And this is where the fence comes into play, because, you know, obviously a lot of people, you know, the early ground and pound days, as we were talking about in the first half, you know, people used to take their opponents down against the fence because they would struggle to get up. Then we started seeing fighters, you know, they would use the wall walk to get up. But with Khabib, you can't do that. You know, so Justin Gaethje, if he finds himself in this position, at some point he's going to start turning away from those strikes, or he's going to be forced to turn by the pressure of Khabib and that handcuff that he uses around the back, because you can't turn turn to face him in that position, you have to turn away in order to unbind your arm. And that's where then the back becomes exposed. He continues hitting you until he can slide an arm under the neck and get the rear naked choke. And I mean, this is really what we expect from Khabib. And the question here is, can Justin Gaethje stop that? Because nobody else has been able to so far. Everybody succumbs to that pressure, the ground and pound, and ultimately a finish at some point. If the ground and pound isn't enough to get them out of there, then his rear naked chokes are really a thing of beauty. And it's got that same crushing mentality that he has with his ground and pound and his control. He'll go across the face, he'll twist your head off your shoulders. He doesn't mind. He puts you in enough pressure to make you want to give up and get out of there. And we've seen it happen over and over again. With a Khabib fight, we expect that to be the finish. And, this is where the challenger is really up against it, because he has to break that mold and do something very different.
This is fascinating, isn't it, Dan? Because you talk about all of the techniques that Khabib uses in isolation, and they've been using these in wrestling for years. There's nothing new here. It's his application and the way that he puts it all together, which just makes him this devastating 28-0 fighter. And with that in mind, he's undefeated and no one's been able to solve the puzzle yet. So I think we should, from here on out, just try and come up with a couple of different ways in which Gaethje can get this done, because Khabib is the puzzle that no one has solved yet. So I feel like we should put a little emphasis on the challenger for this one. And Dan, I'll turn it over to you to come up with a couple of ideas that you might have when looking over Gaethje and what he can use against someone like Khabib to try and be the guy to take away his perfect record.
Well, of course, and this is all about the if. If he can stay on his feet, if he can get back to his feet, and if he's in good enough shape to deal with that kind of pressure. And that is the big question. And obviously with Gaethje being the challenger coming into this one, we have to try and figure out a way that he could, potentially wrestle the belt off Khabib, or not even wrestle it off. That'd be the wrong way to go about it for sure. But I mean, really, it's down to those first two rounds. If he's able to stay on the feet, then he's got a few different things he can work on. Now, his low kicks are a thing of beauty. And what we saw, even in the fights that he lost, even against Poirier and Alvarez, he chopped their leg to bits. He was dropping Alvarez with low kicks. And if he can flatten that lead leg of Khabib, it affects every part of Khabib's game. Because you've got to think, as we were talking about with Khabib's evolving striking game, he's got a good jab, but that requires you to plant on your lead leg to land it. He's also got a great shot, which also requires him to level change on that lead leg. So, that is a main part of Khabib's movement, is mobility. I mean, his confidence is going to be on the rise if he starts stuffing takedowns. And if he's already in the third round and he's defending takedowns and looking fresh, then he knows he's still got 3 rounds to land the power shots. Dismantling the lead leg is going to be a big part of it. And that is going to complement the rest of Gaethje's game as well, because it's going to take away the threat of the shot from Khabib. It's going to nullify that eagle punch, which requires the dip to throw the arm up under the chin. And it leaves him a little bit more of a sitting duck for the power punches of Justin Gaethje.
We've also seen an intelligence, a kind of new intelligence to Justin Gaethje's game, Dan, which I hope you agree. And Trevor Whitman, I'm sure, is the man behind that. I think he realised that he was never going to have longevity in this game if he, went into the fight metaphorically face first. And that intelligence of his striking is really going to have to be called upon to overcome Khabib in this one.
It is absolutely, that hard-headed style of Justin Gaethje, although it may have been able to cause Khabib problems, this new version of Justin Gaethje is definitely more problematic for a multitude of reasons. The main one being he's not there to get hit anymore, and you've got to think. So if you think about Gaethje when he first joined the UFC, his defense was to cover and move forward. If you cover, it cuts down that return time for your strikes. So he's covering and then he's striking.
Right.
That also allows Khabib to set up the takedown, because that jab is going to raise the guard of Gaethje, which then opens the level change up. So being able to keep his hands down and slip his head off the center line is going to open up a lot more options for Gaethje, and it's going to make it more difficult for Khabib to land his own punches. So the intelligence in that approach is going to really pay dividends. If you go back and watch the Cowboy fight, the way that he moves back away and counters Cowboy on the way in, you can't do that if you're covering strikes. You have to force your opponent to miss. that's also a new crease in his game, because we don't normally see Justin Gaethje move backwards. And he might have to move backwards in this fight. He might have to be a counterpuncher. But in recent fights, we've seen him doing that. So that might be another option for him. And then the other thing that I'm going to go back to is the intelligence. Over 5 rounds is going to lead, as you said, to longevity in his career. But it's also going to lead to some longevity in his fights as well. Like, Tony Ferguson's face going into the 5th round is normally what Justin Gaethje's face looks like going into the 2nd round. If you look at the stats in that one, I think Tony Ferguson landed 45% of his strikes. Justin Gaethje was at 72% success rate,
Wow.
which is ridiculous. Not only is he not taking as much damage as he was, but he's also handing out so much more damage, because if a punch is coming at me, I can cover it and then return. If the punch is coming at me and I can slip, I can hit at the same time. I quote Bruce Lee every day of the week. It's the intercepting fist, but you've got to think about your own defense first. There was always the thought process from Bruce Lee is, why would I block and then strike when I could do the same thing at the same time? Block and strike or slip and strike, which is what we see at the really high level of the UFC. And that's where Justin Gaethje's turned the corner. Being able to back people up, being able to land a significant amount of strikes with a high success rate, and that striking differential on the feet being heavily in his favour in his last fight. Tony Ferguson looked like he'd been beaten up with a tennis racket going into that 5th round. And the reason it was stopped was because of the mess of his face. He was kind of wobbly on his feet. He'd been punished. He'd been beaten up. And I feel like, if you get Justin Gaethje through those first 2 rounds against Khabib, if he can keep up with the takedown offensive, if he can stay on the feet, if he's able to get back to his feet over and over again and not fatigue his gas tank out, which obviously is going to be a main part of the game plan for Khabib, then you've got to deal with the striking of Justin Gaethje, which is far more educated than it was when he first joined the UFC. And again, like I said, chopping down that lead leg is going to make him more of a sitting duck. It's going to put him under pressure. And then Gaethje's got that power right hand, which he can just, switch people's lights off with one shot.
All of this, though, Dan, is such a big opportunity for Justin Gaethje. He can change his whole outlook and his family's. His world will change if he becomes the UFC champion, and he'll be etched into urban legend if he's the guy that can take away the perfect record of Khabib as well. So much hangs on those 25 minutes or less.
It does, absolutely. And I think, Justin Gaethje's been afforded the lessons from a couple of losses. And, we hear fighters say this over and over again. You win or learn is the book title. But, you learn so much more from your losses. And no matter what happens in this fight, it's a coin toss. It could go either way. The likelihood is, obviously, in everybody's mind, is that Khabib is going to do to Gaethje what he does to everybody else. But that's because that's all we've seen from Khabib. We've seen Gaethje lose. We've seen him struggle. We've seen him fall. So it's easy to see ways in which Gaethje can lose. But those losses have also taught him many lessons. And we've seen in his last 4 fights, there's a difference in his approach. There's a maturity in his approach. He knows what he's up against with Khabib. And I would imagine Justin Gaethje's coming in here with full confidence that he's a different kind of fighter to anybody that Khabib's faced in the past.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. Dan, as always, thank you so much for your analysis. Cannot wait for this one. Khabib versus Gaethje. Keep the conversation going using the hashtag InsideTheOctagon. Tweets at UFC Europe. It is the final event from here on Fight Island. Enjoy it, and we'll be back with you for the next pay-per-view. Thanks for watching.